welcome you all to this afternoon's discussion, Can You Be a Perfect Parent? This discussion forms part of the contemporary controversies strand at the back of ideas, and first of all I'd like to thank our sponsors, SAB Miller, for their support for this discussion. My name's Sally Millard and I'll be chairing the discussion this afternoon. I'm co-founder of the Institute of Ideas Parents Forum, and we're a forum that meets regularly to discuss some of the many controversies that surround parenting culture. We try and look behind the headlines and examine why it is that the way we bring up our children, how we bring up our children, has become subject to so much scrutiny and concern. And these discussions that we've been having over a few years now really have been the inspiration for this discussion today. Whenever I've told people that I'm organising this discussion, can you be a perfect parent, everyone's stock response has been no, of course you can't. And on the one hand you could say, well, nobody's perfect, but I think when you look at all of the controversies that do surround parenting today, you could say that no one wants to stop trying to make parents perfect. To help us to answer some of the questions that we've posed in the discussion, can we be a perfect parent, and how much does how we parent really matter? I've got a great panel, and each of my panellists will speak for 5 minutes each to introduce the discussion before I bring it out to you to ask questions and make any comments that you've got. People who've been to previous sessions will know that we employ the yellow card, red card, and basically I'll be passing the yellow card down to the speakers when it's time for them to start finishing, and the red card is stop. As I say, I'm going to introduce all my speakers, but first of all I have an apology, because you will have possibly seen in the brochure that Natasha Droff, who was the author of Mum's Net Rules, was going to speak today, but unfortunately she's had to pull out. But we are very lucky that at the very last minute, Kate Williams, the lady on my far left here, has agreed to step in, and she's going to respond to the points that the other panellists made to help us to kick off the discussion. Kate is editor of the Mum's Net blogger network, which I'm sure requires little explanation, but is billed as a hub for bloggers, which promotes great writing on parenting, politics, and all the juice in between. Previously, she worked on Mum's Net's campaigns and policy team, where she was responsible for the Let Girls Be Girls campaign. My first speaker this afternoon is going to be Dr. Stefan Ramakers. Stefan is Assistant Professor at the Laboratory of Education and Society, KU Leuven, and he's written extensively on the issue of parenting culture, including co-authoring with Judith Sweezer a very thought-provoking book called The Claims of Parenting, Reasons, Responsibility and Society. Contemporary Philosophies and Theories in Education. It's got a very long title, but it's a really good book and well worth reading. My next speaker will be Catherine May. Catherine is the Corporate Affairs Director of SAB Miller, which you may know, and especially if you came to the drinks reception last night, is one of the world's leading brewers. Catherine is also Non-Executive Director of the English National Opera and a trustee of the UK Funding Scheme and the Foundation for World Capitals of Culture. And my third speaker will be Dr. Ellie Lee. Ellie is a reader in social policy at the University of Kent and Director of the Centre for Parenting and Culture Studies, which is based at the university. It has a great website and a great Facebook page, which is well worth subscribing to if you're interested in this area. And Ellie is the co-author of the forthcoming book, Parenting Culture Studies, which will be out with Palgrave in April. and which I, for one, am very much looking forward to reading. So, Stefan, if you could start us off, please.
Thank you, Sally. You know, that last bit wasn't actually part of the title.
Okay,
it's a series title, anyway.
It's a good book anyway.
But thanks. As Sally already mentioned, I'm going to approach this issue from a philosophical point of view, so just to sort of set the scene. And since I'm not a native English speaker, I'll read most of it, actually. I want to talk about two senses of perfect. I take it no sane person ever actually claims or has claimed that parents can be perfect. Nevertheless, there is a sense of the concept perfect that is operative in today's parenting culture, and that is affecting parents and the way we look at parenting, and that's hinted at in the blurb of this session. Now, this notion of perfect can be attributed to the fact that we have predominantly come to look at parenting from a scientific, in particular developmental psychological and neuropsychological perspective, which assumes a causal logic and which accepts, in an unquestioned way, a particular kind of goal. That is, the way to understand child rearing or upbringing is in terms of a linear developmental story, in which certain outcomes are implicitly posited as the desirable endpoint, and anything parents do along the way is understood as affecting the next step, and as taking us one step closer to reaching this endpoint. And the desirable outcome of this parenting should be emotionally stable children, confident children, emotionally literate children, or any other variety that is on offer today. Now, apart from the many problems related to extrapolating findings from empirical research to real-life parenting, what I want to draw attention to here, what we do in the book actually, is that the scientific account of parenting risks reducing child rearing to what parents do in order to achieve this or that outcome, and hence confines upbringing to a one-to-one interaction scheme between parent and child. Within this perspective, perfect parenting actually becomes something of a real possibility. The sense of perfect that is operative here is what I would call, or would like to call, perfectibility. The sense that there is a state that can be achieved and that a parent can perfect herself in order to execute tasks that with most certainty will lead to the desired outcomes. And here parenting is presented as something that is closed. The scientific account suggests closure regarding what aspects of life with our children constitute parenting, and regarding what we as parents find meaningful to do in relation to our children. Now, second, however, the kind of relationship between parent and child presupposed by this discourse is not the kind of relationship, I want to argue, that parents actually have with their children. More precisely, something is left out of the contemporary account of good parenting, namely the simple given that raising children also always means introducing them into a common world and what that might mean. Now, at the very least, this entails that parents always inevitably present and represent something to their children instead of do certain things in order to achieve certain outcomes. They, and I quote a German philosopher here, Mollenhauer, they exemplify one way of life or another for a child, end quote. Now, this imposes a particular burden on parents that is different from the one put on parents by the current parenting culture. And connected to this, it also brings out a different sense of the concept perfect, one which we might be able to go along with. The burden in child rearing is not first and foremost one of doing the right things in order to achieve this or that outcome, but is to be seen in terms of a concern for the world. Put differently, as it is obviously nonsense to speak about the possibility of a perfect parent, there is perhaps also obviously a sense in which we collectively want a better world for our children. And the sense of perfect that is operative here has nothing to do with the causal logic inherent in current scientifically underpinned advice, but rather is best understood along moral or ethical lines. The relevant question to be asked is not one about causal relationships between, for example, parenting styles on the one hand and, for example, brain development on the other, but is, and I'm quoting this German philosopher again, Mollenhauer, is the life that is being embodied a good one? And does the kind of life being lived contribute positively to the child's upbringing? End quote. These questions cannot be answered, I want to say, within the scientific account, since, and here Mollenhauer again, quote, every instance of upbringing and education has to do with the culture as a whole. and the social structures that are part of it. Instances of upbringing and education have to do with the aspects of our common heritage that are passed on from generation to generation, and with the capacity of upbringing and education to prepare children to face the future." End quote. Now, this reconnection of childbearing with culture as a whole brings parenting back into the picture as a process that is open and that is a collective responsibility. The old generation versus the new generation. I'm colorblind. It also makes clear that answers to contemporary problems supposedly attributed to parenting need to be seen in terms of broader societal structures and in terms of a broader ethical discussion about what is a life worth living. Thanks. I'm going to keep it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I have both a professional and a personal interest in parenting. I'm working for a big international brewing company. My professional interest in parenting is really around the relationship that we have with alcohol as individuals. As we have so much exposure in so many countries, we work very hard at SAB Learner to understand what it is that makes some people have a difficult relationship with alcohol, a harmful or hazardous relationship with alcohol, and what we need to do in the societies that we operate in to ensure that people's relationship with alcohol is positive, that alcohol is used as an enhancement of their life and a part of their social celebrations, which of course is the role that alcohol has played for thousands of years, and particularly beer, which has got a really rich history of being something that communities always develop for themselves wherever there have been civilizations. And beer has been used over many thousands of years to celebrate big life events, to mark business contracts, and for social celebration of many different kinds. So, in the modern world, be that in the African countries that we operate in, or in a country like the UK or Western European markets that we're in, we do see that we have a responsibility towards the communities that we offer our products in to say, what is it that sometimes goes wrong? So over the last few years, we've spent quite a lot of money underpinning social research into the relationship that people have with alcohol that will sometimes go wrong, and looking at what it is that draws people towards harmful and hazardous drinking. And it won't surprise anybody, I'm sure, in the room, that one of the things that is the biggest component part of things going a bit wrong in that relationship is what we see from our parents. So in recent months, we've underpinned some studies in the UK that have been carried out for us by the think tank Demos, working in partnership with some academic institutions. And we found that the best way we can prepare ourselves in this world for a good relationship with alcohol is to have a good example from our parents. Well, that's great if you do, but obviously it's a problem if you don't. And this led us to look at other aspects of parenting. And there is a popular theory at the moment that is often something that we hear from David Cameron's government and from other authorities around parenting, that having a kind of tough love view with children, showing them the right examples and praising them for good behaviour, and coming down quite hard on them in quite an authoritarian way, prepares children in the best possible way, that's what social scientists tell us anyway, for a positive relationship with each other, with alcohol, and with success in their adult life. So great, that's job done, isn't it? As parents, we should all know that that's the right path to take. But I think life is a lot more complicated than that. And if you're not a good parent, or you don't have good role models around you, or you're a parent and you feel that your parents weren't great parents, I'm not sure where that leaves you, and I'm not sure where people are meant to go. I think we have a lot of questions to answer there, and a lot of questions around what are the right policies that those of us who have any control over what happens in society should be encouraging as the right way for parents to interact with children. And if you are a parent who is on a difficult path, how do you stop that path from growing and presenting a difficult role model for your children, whether that's around alcohol or any other aspect of their upbringing? So I'm really interested to see what we can talk about on the panel and in the room this afternoon, both from a professional point of view, as I said, and a personal point of view. I'm a mother of 2 boys, one in primary, one in secondary education in London, and challenging myself all the time around what are the right things to do for them, to set the right role model patterns for them, and to help and support them through the rest of their lives, and how far do we go in doing that. We all want to be the perfect parent, but I think sometimes we set ourselves some very tough targets around that, and there are some huge pressures from our peer groups and from the media, as well as from politicians, around what is right and what we should be delivering as parents. It's kind of responsibility is hugely upon us that we're going to create the next generation, and we have to get that right. So, very interested to talk about that.
Thank you. Just the time. Ellie?
Okay, thanks. Well, my first response, kind of in the way that Sally suggested to the question, can we be perfect parents, is indeed that nobody thinks we can be. Or certainly, if we look at how the parent is now perceived by policymakers, what I'm going to call the parenting industry, and indeed by those think tanks who conduct research and come up with evidence about what parents do, what you find is routinely the representation of the parent, which is more like the opposite of perfect. And indeed what I would suggest is that the widespread prejudice or belief, which now spreads across all of these groups in society, is actually a presumption of parental incompetence or parental untrustworthiness. Now, of course, those who describe themselves as parenting experts, or those who argue that policy needs to do something about, with or for parents, rarely pose these things this way. So you won't find policy documents where policymakers think, actually we think parents are really, really useless idiots, and we don't trust them to do the first decent thing with their children. Instead, what they say is parents need support, or that what is needed is far greater early intervention to enable parents and families to parent well. I'll just give you an illustration of how it works. This is the present government's policy document for a programme of activity called the Foundation Years. And this document pulls together what they consider to be the evidence from a whole load of other documents that have been written by policymakers in recent years. It says the following: families are the most important influence in the early years. Now, I would consider that to be an uncontroversial statement, seeing as how when kids are 1 or 2, they really don't have much to do with anyone else than their families. So far, so good. What conclusion do you draw? Well, you can draw the conclusion, so what? Yep, okay, that's fine. What a government says is the government will support mothers and fathers by supporting the provision of online and helpline family support services accessible to fathers and mothers, working with sector partners to increase uptake of parenting and relationship programmes, including by funding expert providers to provide relationship support to people who need it, as well as family learning. I don't know what family learning is, maybe somebody can tell me. It then goes on. The government wants to make the most of all of the opportunities for early intervention with Foundation Years by helping professionals to use all interactions with families as opportunities to identify any additional needs of both parents and other key family members. So not only don't they trust parents, they also think grannies, aunties, actually anyone that goes anywhere near a child needs some professional to help them out. So that's basically the way things are. So what I would suggest this tells us is that running in tandem with the belief that what parents do matters more than anything else, that's the idea that Sally flagged up in the blurb of what we might call parental determinism, is the belief that parents cannot be left to do this important job on their own in the context of their families and communities. In other words, from a sociological perspective, what this indicates is that we have a very particular construction of the parent today. It's influenced by both parental determinism, the conviction that how parents behave towards their kids is decisive, with parental determinism's twin ugly sister, the presumption of parental inadequacy. In other words, I would say in sum, parents are thought of today as foolish or useless gods. We have the power to do everything is in our hands, but we are completely foolish and useless, and therefore need all of this intervention to enable us to parent. This raises the last point I want to make by way of introduction, which is the relation this generates between parenthood what it means to take on the mothering or fathering role, and adulthood. Where it may be argued that a prior presumption before recent decades was that adulthood simply preceded parenthood. That is, it would be assumed in general that parents are responsible, autonomous adults prior to having kids. This is no longer the case. And indeed, I would argue you could contend that the opposite is now the case. That is, from the point at which a woman knows she is pregnant, she and her partner are more and more thought of as biologically mature children who really know nothing. In other words, their status as adults actually now ceases at the point at which a pregnancy occurs. And from this point onwards, they need to be overseen and trained in regard to how to behave. Our autonomy, that is our moral authority to decide on what is best and act accordingly, is now seized to cease, not begin, by merit of becoming parents. You want to see how this works in action, it is absolutely everywhere. Many of the best examples come from public health. Start for Life and Change for Life symbolise it to me. The fact that you can have plasticine figures and drawings on leaflets which are supposed to be given to adults, to me tells me a lot about the mindset of current regimes. What's actually written in here is both scientifically illiterate, in my opinion, and utterly patronising in its vernacular. And it's not something which really any self-respecting adult should do anything with and throw in the bin. As it happens, what's said in here about drinking in pregnancy is both scientifically illiterate and utterly patronising. And I'm interested to know what you think about that. I'm surprised overall, as my very final point, that there isn't more outcry from parents about this. That we don't do more to stand up for ourselves and actually say, if not perfect, we're a damn sight better than you lot think we are. My starting point for a better parenting culture comes from the great thinker Hannah Arendt, and I just want to read you something which she said in one of the papers she wrote. Children are, first of all, part of family and home. And this means that they are, or should be, brought up in an atmosphere of idiosyncratic exclusiveness alone, which makes a home, strong and secure enough to shield its young against the demands of the social and the responsibilities of the political realm. That's to say, we can be idiosyncratic, we can raise our children how we like in our homes, that is our private realm, it belongs to us. And in fact, we have the moral responsibility to do so in order to shield our children from things which are too grown up for them to become subject to. She continues, the right of parents to bring up their children as they see fit is a right of privacy belonging to home and family. And my final concluding point is essentially, I think that we need to launch a war to reclaim that right of privacy. And until we do, we will neither have our autonomy as adult respected, and neither will we have anything resembling the public sphere of adult life into which we can introduce our children that Stefan talked about in his introduction.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Would you like to respond?
Other than to say that I'm neither a sociologist or a philosopher, so I'm talking very much from the kind of cold face of parenting. I thought everything that's been said has been very interesting. It's reflected in what we see on the Mumsnet boards on a kind of daily basis. I think there's, I think the fact that Mumsnet has been so incredibly successful is testament to the fact that parents are very anxious about all of this stuff, and that there definitely is a need for kind of some kind of discussion about where parents can get their confidence, how parents can get their confidence back. I think that what Ellie said just now about there being these two models of parental incompetence and coupled with an idea of parental determinism is really interesting. We're all, and I'm certainly, what I see on a daily basis is lots of parents kind of trapped like rabbits in the headlights between those two kind of ideas. I think also one of the things that, what you said also was very interesting about the way in which the state speaks to parents, that there's something kind of fundamentally, there's something has gone awry there. I think that's definitely what we, what I see is that lots of people, when they have children, when they have babies, when they're pregnant, they start to interact with the state in a way that they just haven't done before. and that those relationships and interactions are not always as satisfactory as they should be. And lots of people do find it patronising. They come away from sort of health visitor visits and that kind of thing with a sort of I know that that's not true. That advice that has been given is not what my own personal research has led me to believe. And yeah, so it's, there's something just that it isn't working there, and I think that is why people come to Monstrous, because you're anonymous, you come there, you can ask a question, even you can reveal your insecurities and genuine difficulties in a way that you would hesitate to do, I think, in almost any other environment. And it sort of kind of partly replaces that kind of public parenting that we used to see, when communities lived together much more closely, when we lived near our parents. So you can see a broad spectrum of parenting approaches, and you can ask for advice and receive a variety of different advices. It makes you understand that there isn't necessarily a perfect parent. We know that obviously, but the parenting is as much about choice as anything else that we do, and that the outcomes of our parenting choices, there isn't always this huge differential between one approach and another approach, which I think is what we all worry about, that there is a right approach, and if you don't follow that approach, you've done something fundamentally awful that isn't that can't be fixed. So I think that's what people are doing on Monstrous is probably responding to these questions that everyone has raised. Sorry, Stefan, I didn't say very much about your philosophy. It's very impressive.
Okay, thank you. I wondered if Ellie and Stefan and Catherine maybe would like to respond to some of those questions, and I'm particularly interested in the idea that on the one hand you might criticise what the state, or you have criticised what the state says to parents, and the way that the state talks to parents, patronising. But is there any kind of advice that we should? Is Mumsnet different, for example? Are the blogs different because they're all kind of part of parenting advice? And would you make a distinction as well between that kind of informal blogging type advice and the more kind of formal leaflets that you get, Birth to 5, those kind of publications? And then my second question, which you could come in, which I'd be interested in, is there does seem to be a demand for advice by parents. So it's not, it doesn't seem to me to be just a top-down thing, but it is that parents are constantly asking for advice. Should I do this? Should I let my children stay up till this time? How much television time should they be allowed? Is it right? I think this, but is that the right thing to do? So maybe if you could say something about, where does that demand come from? I don't. Do you want me to? Yeah. Okay. Stefan, go on your chair.
Gender issues. I tend to answer this question by saying that I really don't know what was first, the one for advice, or the fact that something happened which sort of led parents to find it very normal to ask for advice. I don't know what is cause and what is consequent. I mean, we all seem, not all of us, but it seems to be presupposed now, well, parents are asking for advice, so we should give it to them. But maybe their asking for advice is already part of a discourse that's been going on for a longer time. And that has nothing to do with parents themselves asking for this specific advice. I mean, I'm not saying parents have never asked for advice, and have done that, perhaps also to their parents, grandparents, and stuff like that. But we now have developed a very specific way of answering that, in terms of the latest research, number of levels, neuropsychological or whatever, which is a very narrow way of answering that question. So I don't know exactly where it comes from.
And is there a particular kind of advice that you would give to parents? I mean, in terms of your introduction, because
I should say now I can't give you.
No, but I was just, or that you think should be given to parents, because I was just a little bit, I didn't quite understand from your introduction whether you're saying that, I mean, your critique in your book, for example, of the scientific advice and the advice that's given is really brilliant, but I'm not quite sure whether you're saying there's a problem with that advice, but a different kind of advice, more kind of moral advice would be better.
I'm not saying moral advice, actually. I mean, if that's how you and perhaps the audience has understood me, I'm not saying we should enter into a new kind of moralizing parents. That's not what I mean. I'm saying that we should open up the discussion again about what is a good life, and not just offer parents advice in relation to outcomes that sort of have been implicitly posed by the kind of research that is on offer.
Well, the one thing I think we can be certain of when we look at the experience of the last 20 years, really, which is a period of really significant expansion of both the parenting industry and parenting policy, is that for sure nothing's got better. And I would say pretty much the situation's got worse. So what all of this stuff purports to do, which is to give parents more confidence, make them feel more supported, make children's lives better, I think you'd have to say it just doesn't work. So it hasn't achieved any of the outcomes it's suggested. I think what it has done is create this kind of, it's basically created demand. So in terms of where, you know, what starts where, I suppose I would see the thing is in reaction, in relation to each other and in interaction with each other. And I think that the parenting industry has created a demand. And parents do feel, you know, that they need to get advice about everything, ask about everything, that you can't trust your own instincts anymore. And that's how things go on. There is a limit on this, though. It was interesting when, I don't know whether people noticed this, but the government launched this scheme called Can Parent 2 years ago, which was a universal scheme of parenting classes, which actually called parent training, which I thought was interesting, because I used to make jokes that so one day they'll say they're going to train us like you train dogs. And they do actually now, I mean, it's officially called parent training, and nobody raises an eyebrow, which tells you something about how far the whole thing's gone. But anyway, nobody went to these classes. I mean, the scheme is an absolute unmitigated disaster, attended by less than 1% of eligible parents. Reading the evaluation report of the scheme is very interesting. You know, the numbers of excuses and rationalisations that they've got for why parents are clearly have no real interest in being trained by a trainer stretches to 200 pages. So, you know, that's quite interesting. So, I mean, there are some questions about how this affects people and the extent to which it affects people, but one way or another it certainly does. I suppose ultimately the way that I look at most of the things that people want information about and ask about, and around which there are a huge number now of pseudo-experts. I mean, basically that's the way that I look at the parenting industry. It's a form of pseudo-expertise, which doesn't really have a basis in anything, scientific, medical, whatever. People, you know, self-style themselves as experts. I mean, simply the fact that you've had children yourself is now apparently enough to mean that you can become an expert, because that's how a lot of these people market themselves. So it's a peculiar phenomenon, and I think it in itself is worth discussing, actually, the way in which the term expertise is attached. But anyway, my basic view would be is that they don't know any more than, you know, your next door neighbour, your mum or whatever. So I mean, you can ask these people things if you want to, but given the fact that there's, you know, most of these things aren't anything to do with evidence, nobody can tell you really how to get your kid to behave or really how to get them to sleep at night. Anybody's guess is as good as anybody else's. You might as well just, you know, do what works. The thing I find most pernicious of all, I mean, there's lots of things I find pernicious about it, but the thing I find particularly pernicious about the way these things work now is this really self-conscious targeting of the family and the wider family. Grannies in particular are really now being targeted by policymakers and parenting experts who are setting up ever so nice classes for grannies so that you can go to granny training. Playing off, which I think is a genuine anxiety induced by this culture now, Well, I mean, my mum says to me, oh, you know, I don't know, it's all so different now, I don't know what, she feels, you know, feels like she doesn't know what to say. You know, you get into a situation where, you know, people go on all the time to mums and dads, oh, there's all this new evidence, the research shows, blah, 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 blah. And what this does is communicate a very strong idea to the older generation that, well, basically you haven't got a clue anymore. You know, you might have managed to bring up 7 or 8 kids, certainly 2 or 3, but the world in which you did it is now so estranged and different to the one we have now. There's no way you could possibly give your own daughter a basic bit of advice about how to change a nappy. I mean, that's kind of what it's like. And I think what that does is create a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's interesting, this point you make about generational distance. Because the truth is, if you look at geographical mobility, I mean, lots of people do live further away than from their mums and dads, but plenty of people don't. And actually, geographical mobility for lots and lots of families isn't that great. And actually, lots of the time, when people have kids, they move back to where they came from. People talk to their parents and parents a lot on the phone. So I think it's got something to do with the quality of interaction intergenerationally rather than the fact of it. Because oftentimes people say, oh, you know, we all live apart from our families anymore, nobody ever talks to each other. I mean, that's actually not true. It's not true at all. What there is, I think, is a problem of trust. The extent to which we can simply trust informal relations, everyday, hand-me-down common sense to be a sensible guide to how to bring up kids. And that trust is being replaced by expertise. And that, I think, ultimately is the most destructive thing of anything, because if you really want to screw parents' lives up, you estrange them from their own aunties and mums and so on and so forth.
I'd just like to come back to and build on a point that's actually been raised, and I think by almost everybody on the panel, which gives me some comfort, although it's quite a negative aspect of our current society, and not just the society here in the UK, but something that I see in lots of the countries that we have businesses in. And that's something, Kate, you talked about, the kind of interaction that people have with the state. And there's a point that's also been made by Stefan and Ellie. The interaction we have with the state when we become parents is very different. And the quality of that interaction, I think, is pretty poor. And in fact, in this country and in other countries that I often go to on business, is missing the mark. And it's missing the mark for us as parents because we're not seeing that we get great advice, and many people are going around the system and finding other ways and reaching out in their own networks and communities, be that online or real life, to find other ways of getting advice and input. And interesting, one of the things that occurred to me, particularly with the pieces of collateral that Ellie's brought with her today, which I've seen before, these healthy living brochures, they are infantilising all of us at a time when we don't want to be infantilised, we don't want to be treated as children. We have taken on the responsibilities of real adults as parents, and the last thing we need is to be put in that box. And policy formulation is a very blunt instrument these days, as politicians are driven faster and harder to look for the soundbite and to get the short-term quick win. And this is not an area in which we can afford quick wins, actually. It's a very long-term way of thinking and an attitude that we need to build in around this very serious challenge of being good parents. There is I think a dreadful mismatch going on in terms of what is available, what is handed out, what is given to us, and what is really needed.
Okay, I'm going to bring you in a moment, just Kate, is there any quick comments about that?
No, I had a question though. I wonder whether, Ellie, whether you thought, I absolutely get and sort of agree with you that this idea of trust versus expertise, the expertise industry that we've all seen growing up over the last 10 years. What has made us accept it? I mean, where does that come from? When do we? Because presumably there's lots of trust in intergenerational interactions and a sort of concomitant loss of trust in our own capacities. That it doesn't seem to me. I agree that it's there. I don't know, how did it happen?
Okay, good question. If any of you've got any comments in relation to that question or any questions of your own, okay. There's a gentleman here with a blue jumper on. Yeah.
Hi, yeah. I thought the issue about parenting advice, I agree with the idea that I think the way it's put across in policy and the amount of advice out there in books and things is incredibly confusing. There's a huge amount of it, and the whole way science works is that it changes regularly. People think certain things, and that might change in a couple of years' time, and so parents can need one kind of advice and then another kind of advice later on. And I agree with the general principle that parents can do fine without any advice. They have done for hundreds of thousands of years. There's no reason why we suddenly need to give them advice to do that now. On the other hand, I think there are political reasons for advice coming in. And to me, I mean, among the other things attached to it, to me it's kind of serving the same function as schools, in that it is looking for a way to give children better outcomes in terms of functioning as part of Western society, as getting jobs, as being earning a good wage, that kind of thing. And that's partly why I guess parents also seek that advice, because they want their children to do that. And it also can then be used to hopefully increase social mobility and help people with poor backgrounds to get better jobs. And I research infant development, and I'm mostly interested in that side of things with the social mobility, with helping people from poorer backgrounds who we know have worse outcomes to find ways so that their background doesn't determine their outcomes in life, and there are ways of getting through that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a number of people who want to speak, and then I'll bring the panel back and then back out to you. Okay, Jane Sanderman, who's this lady here.
I do think that's the $64 million question, Kelly, which is why is it and what has happened. And I think you're right, people go from being adults and then they get pregnant and then they do, they're believing the science and they do seem to become incapacitated and, what can I do? And is it because it has become this enormous project? It's very important having children, it's lovely to have children, and we all, the next generations will die. It's really important generation, I get it. But to some extent, it seems to have just become the big project, the only intergenerational passing down. And I think almost everyone on the panel, so Stefan says, well, it's actually what will give us the question of the good life and values. So this becomes such a big project that we're actually talking about what is the meaning of life through parenting. Kath, I think, is saying, well, your alcoholism, is the path to treating alcoholism is through the project of parenting. This man here is saying, well, social mobility, the way to address inequality in society is through the project of parenting. And I think, confronted with that, no wonder we think, my God, how do we take on this responsibility? And what do we do? And how can we possibly do that? Should we not be more humble in what perhaps parenting is?
Okay, thank you. Try and keep it's very good comments, but try and keep the comments brief so we can get as many people in. Okay, if you can go right to the back of the room and the woman in purple, and can you keep your hands up so that I can see who wants to speak? And if you can go to this lady here.
Okay, it's a very obvious comment, but I haven't heard anyone talk about class yet. And I would have assumed, quite a few of the panelists have talked about the suspicion of parents, but is it all parents that the government and society in general is suspicious of, or doesn't it tend to be particular kind of parents? And isn't it more, rather than all parents are culpable, that there's a sort of normalisation of a particular middle-class mode of parenting? And I think we all know what that is and what's expected, mum at home or working part-time, private school if you can afford it, lots of extracurriculum activities and huge amounts of resources constantly thrown into your children. I would also suggest that perhaps Mumsnet is perpetuating that, personally, from what I've seen on Mumsnet. And I just wondered what the panel thought about that.
Okay, thanks. So this lady there, and then my husband, you won't know, David X. I have to show some preferential treatment.
I'm actually an antenatal teacher, so I do kind of feel slightly defensive, like I have to somehow defend my profession. I mean, I think what we try and do, certainly I've read the NCT, which probably you quite willing to vilify in all kinds of ways, but in my experience, parents, when they come to us, are very much like sponges. They are desperate for us to tell them what to do. And most of my training has been in exactly to do the opposite of telling the parents, well, what do you want to do? What do you think? Well, we have this student says this, and this student says this. But what do what do your instincts tell you? And what I really want to do is try and reassure parents that it's actually quite hard to screw up your kid irredeemably. And that probably what they want to do, they're probably going to turn out okay. But the other thing I want to say was you haven't mentioned the influence of advertising, which, if you've ever looked at Mother and Baby magazine at the moment, is massive. And it's not just, where shall I have my baby, shall I go back to work? It's also, what pram shall I buy? What nappies do I buy? Do I wash the clothes first? Do I buy this special fabric softener? Do I buy this? Do I buy this? And I really love for parents to understand that being a parent is not about shopping, which is what mostly it seems to boil down to these days.
Thank you.
I'll put my cards on the table and say that I think parenting is just a banal activity. It's just something that we do. It reproduces society, but in and of itself, as the gentleman pointed out, it's gone on for thousands of years. It just happens. It's banal, but it's being rendered, as people have suggested, very, very profound and overwhelmingly profound. Professor Dr. Ramkis, I was very interested in what you were saying about the good life, and I think obviously a precondition for individuals pursuing the good life is that they're exercising moral autonomy. They're using their reason to interrogate what makes up what is it that makes the good life. It's kind of premised upon the individual exercise of reason that they can do that autonomously. Whereas I think what's being said on the panel is that people's sense of their autonomy is being so undermined. So I'd be very interested in how you would respond to that.
I'm going to take two more comments, bring my panellists back to respond to any of the questions they would like, and then come back. So the lady at the back there.
It's quite interesting to be here because I was at another conference last week, which is more of a black audience. So it's nice to see that Caucasian people also have trouble with bringing up their children. And I just want to assure you that it's a universal problem. The thing is that, if I understand it properly, most of the issues you're raising are coming out of talking about how the government is affecting your ability to parent. In the black audience, we were talking about the overrepresentation of black children in the social welfare system, whereby they're being taken in because of the way we parent. Because what's happening is that we're coming from Africa, mostly that's where we were concentrating on in our discussions, and they're coming into the European or other places, and they're still using our African ways to bring up our children, which were not equal, or not equal, they weren't compatible, is what I'm looking for, in this environment. We have a saying that the village brings up a child, which means that everybody has a say in how your child is brought up. So if you as a child are going to school and you do something naughty on the road, you can know that the drum beat has reached your house already, and your mother knows that you've done this thing wrong because somebody has already told her. So therefore you are going to get punished or reprimanded or checked for it. When we stated this in the audience, somebody added onto it, I think it was an Australian part of it, which says that if you don't involve the children will burn the village down. And this seems to be what might be happening in this country too. So I'm just sort of saying that, I acknowledge the fact that one of the other things that's happening is that it's very difficult to participate in bringing up children as part of a village. Because not just trust has gone down, but fear has increased. And the fear is that I have friends who are single, male, female, and they'll say they won't touch another person's child. Because you know what, if you touch it, you might touch it in the wrong place. You know, you could lift up the child, the skirt goes up, you're going to be a paedophile straight away. If you talk to it in a nice way, give it a sweet, which we would have taken when we were little, you're now grooming it. So there are lots of things that are coming up that are actually making people afraid to be people and to respond. So, you know, it's like we're talking about the material things, as the lady said, but we're not talking about the humanity of the person and the warmth that comes from everyone around you, not just your parents.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one more. This lady here.
Yes, thank you for what you said, because you said part of what I was going to say, is that this is a particularly difficult issue for parents who come from cultures where actually you do punish the child physically. And it exists, by the way, in our own indigenous culture. You don't necessarily have to come from Africa or somewhere to want to punish your own child your own way. It leads to very great problems in which parents are actually afraid to touch their own children. Children turn around on their parents, say, if you touch me, I'm going to report you. And it can actually literally lead to somebody, and I'm talking about a parent I know, saying, I'm so worried, I cannot control my child, I'm terrified he's going to go out in the streets and get involved in the gangs. I can't prevent him. I think I'm going to have him adopted because I can't deal with this. And then of course she goes to parenting classes, and that leads to her son sitting on the stairs, sitting on the naughty step, in a fury with his mother, and terrible relationships between parents and children, and many parents are in a very, very difficult situation, and they really don't know what to do, and really the state should just get out of it, frankly.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've had a number of interesting comments and points, just to remind you of a few of them, but if maybe you could come back on things that particularly interest you. So we've had a question on the point about a lot of the advice being confusing, but that parenting is very important in relation to social mobility. But the point here about how enormous the project of being a parent seems to be now, and that in a sense it's become the only intergenerational passing down, and what pressure does that put on parents. We've had a point made about again about that there is a demand for parenting kind of lessons, if you like, and that actually some of the providers are really saying to parents, it's kind of up to you, which is quite interesting. And then a point about in order to exercise the good life, then you need to actually be able to exercise moral autonomy. That was a question to Stefan. And then some very interesting points about is there a cultural bias, I suppose, in the parenting advice, and what impact does that have on parents? So don't think you have to answer them all, but maybe one or two things that you think are particularly interesting. Kate, would you like to?
Yeah, no, just to respond to the point that the lady made about Mumsnet reflecting a kind of middle class ideal and perhaps perpetuating that. I think actually, interestingly, Mumsnet's, in the research that we've done about who our users are, it's a much broader spectrum of social classes than you might think, and that's, obviously it depends the day that you're looking at it, but having been on Mumsnet as a user and working there for several years now, I think I can absolutely say with my hand on my heart that it reflects a very, very wide variety of backgrounds and approaches and classes. So I don't think that's an entirely sort of fair assessment of what Mumsnet does. I think, though, that the idea of an idealised middle-class parenting, approach is interesting, because if it is being if that kind of type of parenting is being idealised, it's not working for the middle classes, I think. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm going to express this quite as well as I could, but I think the kind of anxiety that we see on Mumsnet around parenting expresses, amongst our users who probably are middle class, tells me that perhaps the middle class is feeling a little less sure-footed than it was, and that perhaps one of the reasons that there is so much anxiety about reproducing middle-class values and perpetuating, enabling your children to have the kind of life and sort of possessions and all the kind of signifiers of middle-classiness. I think there's a lot of anxiety now about whether that is going to be possible or not, and that the anxiety is kind of also ramped up around the kind of the very smallest differentiation between an A at GCSE and an A star at GCSE now seems to kind of potentially have a massive impact on your child's future, and that's also sort of adding to a sort of slight sense of hysteria, about whether we a sort of loss of confidence, I guess, which is, I think, just interesting to observe. So.
Well, there are a couple of points that were raised, one that I would like to build on a little bit, and one of them again was the piece about class, and also the piece that the antenatal teacher at the front raised about the influence of advertising, which I think is very important. Ellie, you spoke earlier on about the rise of the sort of parenting industry, and we can't look beyond the tremendous sort of dual forces of power of the two major influences in most Western countries around where we're getting input to how we live. And that's the state, and the other is the media and paid for advertising, and not just paid for advertising, but paid for content that crops up through all sorts of other means, useful advice leaflets that are actually have been sponsored by a commercial entity, and that might be a bit blurred around the edges. It might be very clear that they've been paid for, and where that is actually going. It's quite interesting to me because I work in the one area of consumer manufacturing where most players in the industry work very hard to ensure that people buy and consume their product moderately, because that's the only way you can operate as an alcohol producer, by playing the game straight and not by encouraging people to drink too much, because that's a surefire way to be put out of business. But when I look around me at other areas of commerce, there are not those sorts of constraints being applied to the commercial operation of businesses, and I think that that is another big issue. Would I like to see more regulation around that? No, I probably wouldn't, because I'm not pro-regulating these things. I think we as individuals need to think hard and take decisions about where information is coming from. And I guess that's a neat bridge perhaps to some of the aspects of this class issue. And is the government suspicious, we were asked, is the government suspicious of particular kinds of parents? Yeah, they most definitely are. And I think our government in this country is very worried that people don't do the right thing, and is very keen to interfere, to regulate, to provide very directional kinds of advice, using very blunt instruments, rather than treating individuals as individuals who can make up their own minds, and giving them a range of information to choose from. And I see that in a lot of health policies, which are carried forward and developed not just by our own health authorities in this country, but by the World Health Organization. A lot of the information that comes from them, of course, around parenting is fed out into markets all over the world. You must not wean your child until they're 6 months old. They must be fed only on breast milk. It's the only thing you can possibly feed them that's going to be okay for their development. Sweeping statements. In principle, maybe there are some very good cores of truth around those things, but they are not always applicable to everybody. They're not always right for everybody, and they are a huge burden when they're pushed through such authoritarian channels at parents, especially parents who are first time around, who may be trying to get by on their own. I think that we really need to be able to trust our own instincts a lot more and worry a lot less about this kind of stuff coming down the pipe at us. And I think we've all got to be a bit braver about it.
I think it's worth pursuing this discussion about the good life further, or how we as adults understand our world, understand what we've made, and understand how we change it. I mean, the concept that Arendt used was instrumentality, that's to say that we need to come to terms with our world and work out how we bring the children into it. To me, what that supposes is the prior proposition is an adult task. As adults, we have to engage ourselves in thinking about the world we've made, and the world we want to make, which includes its education system and every component about it, and have some serious grown-up debates about what we're thinking. One of the problems I think that's happening, and is increasingly happened over a long period of time, is that instead of confronting that task, which is an adult task, which children, certainly little ones, you can start when you're about 12, don't really have anything to do with because they're just in the private realm. Instead of taking that seriously, what we're doing instead increasingly is living our lives through the children. So we're trying to find ways of what the good life should be and make ourselves feel better, sort our own lives out. Through making sure that little Johnny gets the A stars, not the A's, and therefore begin to see in our children a reflection of whether or not we're succeeding or failing. The measure of our success or failure adults comes to be our children, which is the most destructive and terrible thing to do to both them and us. It's completely inappropriate for both sides of the equation. And somehow, therefore, I think the starting point for this is why I'm so keen on Arendt's insistence on the demarcation between the public and the private worlds, is to really come to grips with that and to understand what we need to be as adults in public. I mean, that's where we have to start. That's where we exist as active subjects participating in the project of change. And if we confuse the two and end up in a situation where we try and resolve in private the issue of tomorrow and try and find our identity through our children, we lay far too much on them. They can never live up to our hopes, right? All that we do is destroy them, really. And I think it's a completely wrong-headed way to think about children. The NCT I don't like. The reason why I don't like you is because I think you routinely put forward a duplicitous and essentially untrue representation of what you are. I've got absolutely no objection to mothers as mothers together meeting to support each other. In fact, I'm entirely favourable to that as much of the time. The NCT operates as essentially a parastate body. I mean, you're one of the organisations providing the CAN parent classes. You exist as a sub... Well, no, not you personally, but the NCT. The NCT exists as a subset of the Department of Health. You know, a lot of these organisations are like this. The same is true of Let's Leave, this kind of, you know, faux, you know, we're just there for you thing. But it's just not true. And there is this kind of third sector, which is really what I call the parenting industry for short, which exists in this kind of parasitical relation to the state. And I'm not very keen on it. Maybe I'll say comments on class for the end.
Stefan, did you want to respond? No.
I'm still at NCT. I'm sorry.
National Childbirth Trust.
Thank you. I'm sorry, not for a long period. Yes, also on class, a couple of things have been said on that, and yes, I agree, but let me put it this way, that there is I find it unacceptable that on a policy level, parents are being told things, and the things that parents are being told do tend to change over so many years. But I find it a bit unacceptable that the justification for that is on the basis of the scientific research, or research has proven or shown that, because it sort of gives the idea that what we're giving parents is something that is neutral, it's objective. So, but it isn't. I mean, every single piece of research is based on particular conceptions of what parenting is, of what upbringing is, of what a child is, of what a parent is. And these conceptions are not made explicit So under the flag of, or under the disguise of research has shown that governments are actually, on a policy level, we are imposing a particular conception of good parenting onto parents, and that is something, and that is, I think, mainly based on middle class conceptions of what a parent is or a child should be, etc., etc. So the entire historical context of what children are is lost there. And connected to that, I would like to say that on scientific advice, I think researchers have a huge responsibility here. You hardly find, if at all, the kind of nuance in the books that are out there for parents. You hardly find the kind of nuance that you find in academic articles. And with the nuance, I mean the specifics about the population that has been studied or was the object in that particular kind of research. You don't find those kind of things in the popular literature. You only find the sweeping generalities there. So things are picked out and then sort of blown up to proportions that are actually unacceptable or that are not founded in the research that they're supposed to be founded on. And just one final thing about moral autonomy. I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly, but just let me express a worry here. The worry is that in the ways we nowadays tend to approach parents, we are actually not allowing for them to exercise moral autonomy. We are taking it away from them from the very beginning. I think that connects to your point about the reversal of the relationship between adulthood and parenting. Instead of giving them the opportunity to develop some kind of moral autonomy, even to sort of not giving them answers. I mean, that's part of being a moral person, is not knowing what to do and sort of thinking about that or having the time to think about that. I'm a bit afraid that we're actually making it impossible for parents to exercise this moral autonomy. Now, part of that, what I want to, that's the final point, I do think that we should look more at the societal conditions parents find themselves in today. I mean, if we want parents to do some good parenting, well, they do need some time to be able to do that. So what parents do need is proper jobs, proper housing, living conditions in the neighborhoods that are good enough on a basic level, and not just yet another kind of advice on top of many other problems that might perhaps already have.
Thank you. Okay, we haven't got very much time left, but I'd like to see everyone who wants to speak, if you can be as brief as possible, and we'll try and get through every single one of you. Okay, this lady here, Helen Rees, who spoke earlier in the conference.
I'm a bit perplexed. Maybe I'm getting tired because it's Sunday afternoon now, but it seems like there's an awful lot of, it seems like there's a lot of agreement on the panel, and I'm just really a bit perplexed that there is that much, and I just want to tease out whether there is as much as there seems to be. Because I wanted to follow up on your husband's point, which really was quite a, what's the word, a provocative thing to say actually, that parenting is completely banal. And it didn't seem to me, as I say, maybe I'm getting tired, but it didn't seem to me to provoke that much reaction on the panel. But, you know, put somebody from Mumsnet, and in a sense the whole sort of raison d'etre of Mumsnet is that parenting does matter, or that people wrongly think it matters or something. In a way, if that's right, that parenting is just banal, the best thing to do would be to just close down Mumsnet. Because, in a sense, things like Mumsnet are also feeding this obsession with discussing, you know, was it okay what I did? I mean, I'm an avid fan of Mumsnet, but, you know, it does feed that obsession, doesn't it, with, was it okay the way that I talked to my child? You know, was it okay, what are you giving your child for supper tonight? Is it okay that I've given them fish fingers again 3 times this week? So, in a sense, if you really agree with what Sally's husband said, then there's an argument for closing down Mumsnet, although I'd be very sad to see it go. Similarly, all right, just very quickly then, similarly, you know, what you said in your opening remarks, you were saying that parenting was the main sort of focus on the main reason that cause people to have problems with alcohol. But if you really think that parenting is banal, then it would be nice to hear some advice that, drink what you want really, parents. It doesn't matter what you do. And likewise, Stefan, you've written a book on parenting, which I absolutely love, but it does seem to give parenting quite a lot of moral importance. And Ellie, also you set up a parenting culture studies centre. So do the panel really believe that parenting has been our necessity?
Okay, everyone's going to have to be really, really quick, and then there's going to be 1 minute. Okay, I'm just going to take a couple more people. There's a gentleman right at the back. Okay, and there's a lady here with a mustard arm, I think it's a lady, and then after that, the panel. After that, unfortunately, we've run out of time, so I'll be asking my panellists to sum up the discussion for 1 minute each. Okay.
Just a very quick question. Should the state intervene when the quite controversial parental choices are being made, such as female genital mutilation?
Very quickly, if you look at self-reported well-being over the life cycle, like happiness goes up when you're married, employment drastically when you have children, rises again when children go to university. And maybe this industry is meant to compensate or ameliorate that. I just want the panels to be possible on that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask, unfortunately we have run out of time, I'm very sorry. So if I can ask my panel to sum up, maybe Kate, Catherine, Stefan, Ellie, if that's okay, just 1 minute final thoughts.
I don't know if I've got a minute of final thoughts, but just to respond to whether monstrous feeds the obsession or not, obviously I don't agree with that. I think it responds to an existing demand, and I think that what it does successfully, or certainly tries to do, is to, I think a lot of parenting is very banal. Not all of it, but some important bits of it are very banal. And for various reasons that we've been discussing today, have become a focus of incredible amount of anxiety. And I think what OneNet allows is for the banal bits, the banal questions to be answered, put to one side, so that there's real business of developing a kind of authentic, unmediated relationship with your child, if that's such a thing as possible. But at least, a much less mediated relationship with your child can be gone on with. I hope that's what we do.
Well, I don't think parenting is banal, and I think that parenting is a hugely important part of our identities, and those of us who are parents. I do worry, though, that we are being labelled as parents or given as parents by the state and by other bodies, and this terrible burden of responsibility around how we're doing what we're doing. And I would much rather that we step back from some of that and we're more self-reliant, more concerned about our own families and our own comfort, and looking more at our own children rather than benchmarking constantly and looking outside of what we're doing. Just quickly coming to the lady with the mustard arm, you talked about female genital mutilation. Because we have a lot of businesses in African countries, I've been exposed to quite a lot of information about that recently, and I was saying I think that female genital mutilation is physical abuse, and it is something that everybody should have a concern about. There are some very, very effective grassroots groups dealing with female genital mutilation in local communities in African countries at the moment, having incredibly good, positive results around the work that they're doing on the ground. And, rather than the state kind of pushing lots of authoritarian infrastructures around the top of that, if they can be supportive of those groups, which have been shown to have great success by working through, quietly talking mostly to older women in those communities, I think it will. We're seeing it disappear in some countries, and I think if that's enabled to continue, sometimes with state funding, that would be the better way forward than the state coming in with horrible penalties for parents for exposing their children to that kind of thing. That's quite a personal view.
Okay, thank you. Stefan, final thought.
I'm afraid I'm not going to get this across in 1 minute, but in a sense, I'm sorry, I'm going to be philosophical. In a sense, yes, I think parenting is banal. Years ago, I contributed to a book in indulge, so you won't find it in English, with the title The Lightness of Upbringing. It was reference to the empirical likeness of being, so the likeness of it. And at some point we thought of giving the book the title The Banality of Upbringing. We wanted to express the idea that upbringing could also open up to new possibilities. So the lightness the banality has to do with that children, and even the same thing goes for parents, that they should not be sort of punished by keeping the burden of the past with them all the time. Upbringing, childbearing also has to do with opening new possibilities for children, and we seem to be so scared of everything in society today that everything sort of has to be under control, and I have very much problems with that. So in that sense, I would say yes, parenting should be or could be banal.
Well, following our ends, I think being a mum or a dad should be about idiosyncratic exclusiveness, which means I think it should be about your relationship with another human being that you brought into the world. I don't know whether I would describe that as banal. I think it's got a lot more to it than banality, but I certainly don't think it should have anything to do with people other than those in your family and community. I think raising children is a community accomplishment. I don't think it's a particularly easy one. I don't think it ever has been, but I think it's made substantially more difficult, overcomplicated, and goes all askew when it's turned into a professionalised sphere, which we now call parenting. Parenting culture studies is about studying the construction of bringing up kids as a social problem. So, on class, the policy documents never use the word class, but I know that's the right thing to call it. They always call it social disadvantage. And it's true to say that there is a specific focus on the socially disadvantaged and their parenting practices. I think it would be wrong to draw the conclusion from that, though, that that's all that the policymakers are interested in. Can Parent was a universal scheme, and if you look at what was said about it, the argument was made that we want to make going to parent training like going to antenatal education, so just a thing that you do that's normalised, and we want to normalise help seeking following the birth of the child. And I think that is what the coalition government wants to do. I think there's another component part as well that goes on with the problematisation of middle class parenting. Which is actually a certain version of middle-class parenting is now called a form of neglect or a form of abuse. So I'm in lots and lots of discussions where people say that, those who send their kids to boarding schools or, tiger parents or, send their kid, take the kids around doing all this and this and that, that in itself is a form of abuse. Which certainly tells you that abuse and neglect are sufficiently expansive concepts to come to encompass the entirety of the population. What I think about the socially disadvantaged is that actually I'm entirely favourable towards the distribution of resources and thinking about how as a society we do the best for families to create structures and situations in which it's easier for people to bring up their kids. I think not having very much money and living on a crap estate are serious things, and I think that we should do something about that. But I don't think that's got anything to do with parenting. I think nothing to do with parenting. And parenting won't do, you can have as many parenting classes as you like, it's not going to create social mobility. It's just the most ridiculous proposition that anyone could have ever invented. And I really object in my profession, apart from anything else, to the amount of money and energy that's being wasted all the time into these endless studies and pieces of research to suggest that if you change parenting, you'll create a more socially mobile society. The money should be spent on something better. Just give it to the socially disadvantaged, and shut down some of these research units. The one I particularly object to at Essex is these people who are quite seriously saying now that social disadvantage is caused by a lack of breastfeeding amongst socially disadvantaged. I think it's almost literal insanity. And I feel ashamed that these people are part of my profession. Anyway, there you go.
Thank you. Can we thank